Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Anna Pogreb. I am a senior risk strategist at EverC and a knowledge expert in product level risk classification for marketplaces and payment processors. And please allow me to introduce the two lovely people that I'm sharing the stage with today. Erin Brusseau is a director of content moderation. We met when she was working at Wish, but Erin has 20 years of online operational experience. She's focusing on compliance, content moderation, trust and safety space. And I see Erin as one of those people who is truly passionate about protecting both customers and merchants on marketplaces and in e-commerce. She is an expert in data-driven strategies and organizational transformation. So thank you very much, Erin, for being with us today.
Thank you.
And Jeremy Gottschalk is founder and CEO of Marketplace Risk. Marketplace Risk is a premier resource for education, networking, and collaboration for marketplaces and digital platforms worldwide. And Jeremy brings a unique blend of legal expertise, risk management, regulatory compliance, and technological insights. So he's a thought leader, he's an educator in the marketplace industry, and it's a privilege to talk to you today.
Happy to be here.
So, Erin, Jeremy, we are here today to talk about marketplace risk. And by the way, audience, I think, should definitely take this opportunity to ask you, two amazing professionals, any questions that they would want. We will try to get to them by the end of the session. If not, then we will post the answers later. But I wanted to start with this. One phrase that usually comes up when the topic of marketplaces in e-commerce is being discussed is that marketplaces face unique challenges. So from your perspective, what is so unique in the position of marketplaces in e-commerce? Jeremy.
Sure. So when I think of a marketplace, kind of starting with a definition, right? It's a passive venue, more or less, for users to transact for goods, services, property, a lot of things, but generally broken down into goods and services. Essentially, the marketplace is bringing those or providing the platform for buyer and seller to transact. As a result of that, one overarching difference is that the marketplace has little to no control, generally speaking, without implementing tools and resources into the quality of the goods and services, right? And that's why I think that trust and safety and risk comes into play so much more with a marketplace versus a traditional e-commerce website or retailer. And so that to me is kind of the overarching kind of umbrella that sets up the difference. And then where all of the need for, as you were talking about, Erin's background with content moderation and trust and safety, and all of those pieces really need to fit in, because without those things, the quality, the reputation, the risk to the platform and the community is quite high.
So not just marketplaces, usual merchants, they have some control over who's coming to them to buy, and they definitely have control of what they're selling. So marketplace is somebody who sits between two entities, and both of them they have not a lot of control of. And that's right, this is a very vulnerable position.
Yeah, I would say without, and I qualify without leveraging tools and resources, because back in the Craigslist days, right, there was zero control. I mean, and they've maintained that model. Interestingly, like that's been by design, right? They don't really leverage any sort of tools and resources, but there are a lot of tools and resources available. But the business model itself, there's little control if you don't leverage any outside tools and resources, which again, why it's all the more important to do that. And as the marketplace kind of business model has evolved and become so ubiquitous, there have been so many more solution providers and resources available for the leaders and the founders of these marketplaces to really get more control, understand who the users are, what products and services are they selling, and all of that.
Thank you. And Erin, from your point of view, and I know that you very much like to talk about different controls and different resources that you used in your work, so maybe you can elaborate about that a little bit.
Yeah, so I think that like I'm glad Jeremy brought up Craigslist, because Craigslist is truly like the most basic marketplace, right? And it's very hands off. No one at Craigslist is looking or touching anything. You can report posts certainly, but there's no moderation happening really at all. A modern marketplace, whether that be something like Wish or an e-com marketplace, or one that's like Airbnb, which is a service, right? You, I think for a long time there was this idea that we were going to be hands off as well. We were the middleman. But you start to add things like fees in place and other sort of like business transactions, and all of a sudden regulators want to talk to you, right? So I think that it is imperative that we figure out and we use those tools as marketplace leaders to mitigate that risk. And that's not just, I think top line people think about it as being, you're saving the company money, or maybe you're saving the company a PR disaster. Yes, those are fantastic. But also, do we want good customers and do we want good merchants? And if we do, it benefits all of us to make sure that the platform is as safe and transparent as possible. And so there's a million tools depending on who you're dealing with, right? Like obviously EverC is a fantastic one for certain things that you're looking for. But there are other ways that you can gain insights into both your merchants and your customers, your KYC, if you will, and to keep that platform as safe as possible.
So how would you maybe describe like one day of a trust and safety person on the marketplace, since you've been one?
Yeah. So you're getting like typically you're checking a couple of different pipelines, right? You're getting maybe reports from regulators, governmental regulators, depending on your geography. EU, US, UK, all of these folks are coming to you saying, we found something on your platform, or we heard about something happening on your platform, et cetera. You're getting inputs from your customers. They're coming to you and saying, my experience wasn't what I expected. You're getting inputs from your merchants. They're saying, my experience wasn't what I expected. And then the sort of fourth line, ideally, is that you have people in those roles who understand the landscape. And so they're also looking for the next thing at the same time. So you should have both proactive and reactive. Mm-hmm. And then how you deal with those things is a little bit different, right? Consumers and merchants, you have sort of a traditional customer service way of dealing with it, and hopefully you ingest that information and use it to find the bad actors. Regulators, that gets into like sort of the legal space, so hopefully you have a good relationship with your legal team. And those are usually takedowns, so you're looking at whatever it is the listing is, whether it's a house for rent or something for sale, analyzing that listing, figuring out what is in compliance or not in compliance, and then determining what to do from there. It's not black and white. These things can be very complex, as I know Jeremy knows, and Anna, I know you know. So it's not as simple as, get a complaint, deal with the complaint, right? You have to analyze the complaint, who it's from, because if you move out of the regular space and you look at merchants, it's very competitive for merchants, so that sometimes they're going after each other, right? You have to analyze that, and then you have to figure out the next steps. And that's where individual analysts are fantastic, but also all of these other tools that are available to us, scoring of listings or merchants, other ways to sort of identify potential red and or green flags, help analysts sort of narrow down what they were looking for. Gary in the last session was talking about just how, law enforcement will get 3 domains, they check 3 domains, whereas Gary and his folks know that they have to dig. And so I think that's the huge plus to having really good, well-trained, intelligent trust and safety professionals and analysts, is that they're not just going to look at it at the surface, they're actually going to understand what the context is behind whatever it is you receive from customer, merchant, or regulator.
Yes, sounds like a very interesting job and a lot of hats to wear, right?
Yes.
Both of you mentioned regulators many times, and since we're talking about marketplace risk and the title is Are You Ready for What's Next? Jeremy, would I be correct to assume that regulatory risk is the main thing that everybody who enter in marketplaces, business, or in it right now is the main one that they have to face right now?
Yeah, I mean, it certainly didn't exist 10 years ago, right? And I think there's a little kind of historical context is important here, right? So there's some of us who are old enough to remember when the internet didn't exist, and then the internet comes along, and you get eBay and Craigslist and some of these early marketplaces, and at the time there were quite literally zero regulations, right? And in the US, not only were there zero regulations, but we also have in 1996, the Communications Decency Act, Section 230, which protects marketplaces, interactive computer services and others, but specifically protects marketplaces from liability for what happens between their users, right? So it started out as content, right? So the marketplace or the platform couldn't be held liable for what two users said or defamed one another. And that's been interpreted really broadly by the courts in the US to mean that the platform shouldn't be liable for what happens offline as well, right? Like you sell, I don't know, a drug is sold on your platform and it leads to death, or two people connect with one another and somebody gets injured or dies or something horrible, right? And the platform's not liable. And so you have a complete lack of regulations, and you have this really, really strong defensive posture. And so at the beginning of the marketplace kind of business model proliferation, you had kind of a Wild West situation because there were no police, no sheriffs in town, and you couldn't even hold the platform liable, which I think is, by the way, why we have such a robust internet, and particularly in the US, why so many startups launch in the US, because we have, frankly, the best business environment for them to exist. But at the beginning, people weren't really paying attention to the protection of the community. They weren't focusing on content moderation. There were no tools. Quite literally, when I started, there were no tools or resources out there. There were a couple players who were taking kind of their data and trying to use it, but not a lot existed. And so you have like this evolution where all of a sudden you still have the legal protections for platforms, but now you need to convert customers, you need to establish trust, and you need to maintain that trust. So now you have to focus on kind of the trust and safety and the risk management. It's a business decision. And as you mentioned before, at the top line, they'll look at it as a cost center, but the reality is it's pure business. It affects the bottom line when people don't trust, because then they don't convert and you don't get customers. So all that to say that we went a very long time, a couple decades, with no regulations, and we've seen huge growth in platforms, social media, but also e-commerce platforms, and in the EU, in the UK, which is where a lot of the regulations start, and then they kind of come to the US.
Why, by the way?
They're more consumer focused, is my opinion.
Yeah, well, they're more consumer focused, and also you have, I don't remember how many nations are in the EU, but you've got all these disparate perspectives, and it's not kind of a US Republican versus Democrat. You have completely different political systems, parties, et cetera. And when you bring all that together, I think you get, frankly, good ideas, right?
Okay.
It's not like the demonization of a party over a belief. It's like we're bringing all of our cultures together. And as Erin said, I think it's very consumer focused. We need to protect all of our citizens. So I think that I'm sure that there's sociologists who can dig deeper than that. But I think that, it is very much kind of do the right thing for all of these different cultures and communities that frankly are brought together by borders or by the European Union kind of political structure. And so they start focusing on a lot of the platforms, many of which most originate in the US, who probably, being generous here, probably weren't doing as much as they should have been, but had extreme amounts of power and resources. When it started with the kind of Cambridge Analytica situation where people were like, hey, what is going on? And that just, that snowballed into kind of GDPR, the DMA. I mean, all of these different regulations in the EU, then, UK, of course, and now in the US, they generally start in California. And as they said, what I think it goes, so goes California, then goes the rest of the nation or something like that. Really out in front, very consumer protection oriented. And so now we're seeing all of the, not all of, but many of the regulations that originated in the EU and the UK coming to the US, and it's not stopping. And two kind of points I want to make on that. Number one, there are not enough technologists at the table when these regulations are made, so they're very, very well intentioned, but the technology community, they've just been really bad at like getting to the table and staying there, right? It's kind of been this reactive, defensive instead of being proactive and engaging with regulators. So as a result, you get very well-intentioned regulations that kind of miss the mark or somewhat or altogether. So there's that. But the other piece is, the industry has had decades to organize itself and self-regulate and just didn't take the opportunity. And here comes the regulations.
And I would add to that, I would say a couple things to Jeremy's part about no technologists being at the table. One of the things, like as a piece of advice you can do as a marketplace, is get to know your regulators, develop a relationship with them. It seems scary. You don't want to be talking to them when they're constantly looking for problems on your platform, but they will invite you to roundtables. They will, in the UK or the EU, where they talk to people about how should we structure these regulations, and it's imperative that the marketplaces, the technologists, are at those tables. So get to know your regulators, find out who they are, introduce yourself. If you haven't had a problem and you hadn't had to talk to them yet, even better, right? You're coming to them in a positive space.
Right.
And from the whole, so goes California, goes the rest of the US, keep in mind there are a lot of other states in the US that are working on regulation. And selling in the US gets very difficult as states begin to differentiate. So I think a lot of platforms and the people who are building these policies, what you should do is kind of do the EU thing. If you want to talk to other people in your space, do it, but decide what you feel like is good for society, your platform, the best for your customers and merchants. Look at what the EU is doing, look at what California is doing, and build your policies around that. Prepare. Don't get shut down in a country. I could talk about that very specifically. Don't get shut down in a state. Don't put yourself in a position where Illinois doesn't want you to sell into Illinois anymore.
Yeah. Well, and one thing that's super interesting about that is, most of these companies, at least in the early days, right, they were launched by really innovative risk takers, right, who tended to be a little bit younger, right, and so not the level of business experience that Walmart CEO or IBM CEO, right, and through no fault of their own, and this isn't any backhanded statement, but because we wouldn't have these platforms if it weren't for these risk takers who had an idea and just went for it, right? But as a result, things like engaging with regulators, legislators, it just doesn't, you might not even think about it, right? Because it's just, you've never done it before. And so what's really interesting about what Erin said is if you look at one really good example, if you look at AB5 in California, right, there were basically reclassified all workers as employees unless you were exempted out. There were several platforms with government affairs teams who simply lobbied and got an exemption from the law. And I'm not going to name any names, it's all public information. But they're just very proactive and very smart about this. And they've got folks that are engaging with regulators and legislators proactively. And in this case, in an environment that frankly could decapitate a marketplace, a services marketplace, they're completely exempted out of it, right? So it's an amazing example of why you need to engage. And also to what Erin said, proactively when your house isn't on fire, right? Because if they're coming to you and you're reactive, you're defensive, like they're already suspicious. Nobody loves big tech. Nobody loves tech anymore, right? Like those days were at least the pendulum has swung the other way for a while. And so if you engage, explain who you are, explain the impact that you have, how you benefit consumers, workers, et cetera, then when your house is on fire, or then when legislation comes up and you can say, hey, remember me, we met, blah, 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 they're going to take a much different approach. You've got way more credibility. And in some cases, right, you keep in mind that regulators are human beings. These aren't computers that are deciding these things. So if you go to them proactively and say, hey, this is kind of our business model, this is what we do, et cetera, you know, I don't know, stop short of getting an opinion from them, but you engage. The regulator who has the requirement, I guess, to enforce the law, right? It's their interpretation sometimes, and they can actually help you, right, to avoid some negative outcome. So I think it can't be overstated or said enough how it's important for every platform to engage with whoever the stakeholders are, not their immediate stakeholders, but you know, the regulators, legislators, administrators, et cetera, because regulation's coming, as Erin said, it's not just California. Many states are doing it. And so, you know, you're going to be fighting this battle on many different fronts. But having a good, you know, at least engagement, government affairs strategy is going to be really helpful, and it's going to be necessary before you know it.
And it goes back into the whole, like, I know, you know, we're often looked as cost centers, but this is where having a really good, talented team will save you every time, right? A lot of times, and I've had this experience, I've had regulators come to me first before they release it to the press. If there's something on my platform or even on another platform, that lets you get ahead of the story, which every business needs to do, right? That's just how it works. Two, it also lets you become sometimes the person giving the positive quote in the negative story about what's happening on a marketplace, right? So big marketplace A did this regulator's going after them, they're being sued or however, then you're the quote that says, well, we're safe because we do X, Y, and Z, and we work directly with this regulator. So while it is the right thing to do, it's also incredibly good for your business in a lot of ways. There's great PR, there's great marketing that comes out of that.
Yeah, yeah. And if you don't have, especially in the early days, you know, resources need to be spent wisely, right? There's a reason that I'm not a founder or a CEO of a startup, because those are really hard decisions to make. And so I get it that, you know, you have to allocate resources. And, you know, if you don't grow the business, you don't have a business, none of this matters anyway, right? So like you have to balance these things. But for organizations that don't have the resources to establish their own government affairs, or even have somebody kind of take that responsibility, I'll put a plug in. There's an organization that was founded by TaskRabbit and Thumbtack and Lyft and a bunch of years ago, the Marketplace Industry Association, that essentially aggregates and advocates on behalf of its members. Not on every issue, but on issues that are specific to the marketplace business model. And so even just getting plugged in to stay aware of the trends, stay aware of what's happening at a minimum is good. But, you know, you can join and become a member and essentially have a voice in the advocacy efforts.
And from my side, I'll plug Jeremy and Marketplace Risk. I think it's a really great organization. I think that the events that Marketplace Risk holds are fantastic. Even if you know nothing, and you're not a trust and safety or a risk professional, engage with that material, go to one of the events, talk to people. Even if you don't have that dedicated person, everyone in this industry kind of wants to help each other, which is really unusual and fantastic. So even if you're early or you just don't have those resources, just talk to some people. They can give you some ideas. What are you going to face? So you're not blindsided when those things inevitably come up, and you have maybe a little bit of a plan. I think that's absolutely key for like founders and early startups, is just think about or talk to some people who could give you some ideas about what could go wrong, and then you are prepared.
Yep.
Thank you so much. I mean, I have nothing to add, because I think we covered that very, very well. And anything else you maybe want to give? Because you mentioned it, Jeremy, at some point, that people who join such sessions, they want to go out with some takeaways. Okay, so we spoke about reaching out to your regulators, finding good people to work in your team, joining an organization like yours. Anything else you think you would give as an advice to maybe not regulations related? There are other risks that marketplaces face. So maybe anything else you want to add?
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't normally respond with a shameful plug, but one of the goals with marketplace risk is really to identify the issues, right, and to serve as a resource. And that's truly what we try to do, because even if you have a very specific role in a company, there's not enough hours in the day, and you can't be an expert in everything. And so what we try to do is to what I call issue spot, like bring up issues that leaders can then kind of action, look into, seek just help, support, resources, et cetera. The other thing, though, we try to do is connect this community. And the interesting thing, to Erin's point, this entire community, trust and safety, just broadly trust and safety, but risk and all of this, it's all been created from the bottom up, right? There's almost, I don't know, maybe there's one and I'm forgetting, but there's almost no CEO or investor group who said as a mandate, we need trust and safety from day one, right? It's generally been born out of customer service, or bad things happen, and then the function kind of gets created. But this community has really grown from the bottom up, and part of the reason that it's such a kind of tight community is because there were no resources, and you had to ask people in your shoes at other companies, like, how are you dealing with this? Right? To this day, there are still too few resources. There's still too few events, which is why I think events like this are so important, because we need to educate, get information out there and to connect people. And through that kind of networking and those connections, it's amazing. One of the things that I love is, you have someone like Erin who's been doing this at huge scale, right, at huge companies, and she could very well connect with a founder who's just got an idea or just launched, and kind of get that, I don't want to say brain dump, but the benefit of all of Erin's experience and expertise. And in my experience, exactly like Erin said, the community, people want to help. People are looking for help, and people want to help. And that's super unique, because it creates a community and creates an opportunity for, I think, all of these topics, whether it's kind of the legal or the regulatory or the trust and safety, it creates an environment where you can find the answers from people who really want to help, and for early stage, but you can also get it for very late stage companies or scale ups, or the Metas and the Googles of the world are at these events, and they want to share their knowledge as well. So I think it's super unique, and I think it's super. You need to stay informed. I would say that just even getting on the email lists of the Trust and Safety Professional Association, of the different Digital Trust and Safety Partnership, all these different groups that exist, just go sign up for all their emails. You delete half of them because you're busy.
Oh, I think Jeremy internet, yes, got stuck. While it's happening,
Yeah,
I have a question for you, Erin,
sure.
from a little bit more on the
But
ground
at some
question.
point, one will catch your eye, and you'll go to an event, you'll go to a meeting, and that's how you can stay informed.
Sorry, your internet got stuck, Jeremy. So you hear us?
Yeah.
Great. I wanted to ask Erin from her experience, because if we're talking about sharing experience and how do you do that, those questions.
Yeah.
And Jeremy mentioned, and you also mentioned that it's not always very clear to the leadership. Why do you need trust and safety? It's not, yeah, they understand it's good for business, but can you maybe share some tips on how to explain to leadership why you need to invest in all of these things, talking to regulators, people, tools, and analysis, all of this, how to explain it to them?
Yeah, I mean, I think I tend to put together, I know for the most part in any industry, if I'm talking to exec level C-suite, they're concerned about reputation and money. So that's usually how I approach it. So if you don't have a trust and safety team yet, but you maybe, often this is born out of customer service, to Jeremy's point, or to legal, or both, right? Something has happened and now you have to create this. go to them and dig into your own data, dig into your own interactions with customers, merchants, your payments providers. We haven't talked about that. Like, I think marketplaces tend to not, like payments is over here, marketplace is over here, and you use each other, but you don't talk to each other about those things. And then it's actually very easy to put together a data story around it, right? Very easy to say, if we do this, here's where we're going to improve churn. Here's where we're going to improve the metrics of the people on our site, whether it's that we're going to get better customers because we're getting better merchants, because there's a waterfall that happens, right? So you can dig into your data, your customer service data, your chargeback data, your payments data, your returns data. There's all of these different places that you can look depending on your industry, and put together the story of making the case for one full-time person costs X. Here's what that's going to mean over the course of the next 2 to 5 years. And it's always, always positive. It's almost never negative, because that one person, and this goes back to Gary's, conversation in the last session about, the time that he has, and how much time is put into these things. You have that one person that's dedicated, that puts all this time in. So when I am talking to the people who hold the purse strings, I always go with the data story on it, as what the money and the reputation is going to be. And then for myself, I'll add the part about, like, this is really what we should be doing too, as part of our social contract, right? Like, that's outside of the business world. There is a social contract that we should keep, and that and doing the right thing there builds a sustainable business. People are going to talk about you. They're going to come back to you because they trust you, consumers and merchants. So that's kind of usually how I tend to pitch it internally.
Yeah, I want to add one thing, because this is something that we've researched, and Erin, frankly, I wish we would have included you in on this. Maybe you participated in it, but one of the biggest questions that we get all the time is, how do you make the case, for trust and safety, right? Like, what's the ROI? And if you do a really good job, right, you're still trying to prove a negative, right? Like, something bad didn't happen. And when, the downside of doing a really good job in trust and safety is you don't look like you're as valuable, right? Because you're doing such a good job and bad things aren't happening. And it's like, you got to convince people, yeah, but we prevented those bad things from happening, right? It's hard to do. I mean, it truly is trying to prove a negative. And so one of the things I think, and part of the reason I say that, Erin, is because we were trying to figure out, like, how do other platforms measure it, make the case, and advocate for themselves, resources, initiatives, et cetera. And one of the things that I've found is, in the tech world, I hate to say this, but we're all kind of followers to some degree, right? We want to see what others are doing. And more, the larger platforms are releasing publicly their trust and safety data, whether it's, their incidents and all of that stuff, or their what their headcount is, what the titles are, things like that, right? And so leverage that, right? Because I hate to say it, but if you go to one of your internal stakeholders or leaders and say, this is what Meta does, this is what Wish does, et cetera, immediately, everybody wants to be Meta, right? Whether we admit it or not, like, everyone wants to be really successful, big platform, right? And so if you can, in addition to the data, like, always collect everything, analyze all of it, but understand what other platforms are doing, and it can be really compelling, because, like, at least it's a data point, but it's a data point of an aspirational company.
Yeah, call me the next time you talk about that. I'd love to.
Absolutely.
And I really totally agree with the idea that despite wanting to make business and help people, sell things, buy things, which is important, we really, all of us and our leaders and people like us, we just want to do good. And it's one of the reasons why we're here today. And I wanted to say thank you very much for being here today with us. And here's Eileen, joined us to probably say something too.
Hello, everyone. Thank you so much, Jeremy and Erin and Anna, for having these great insights and sharing them on the trends that marketplaces need to be watching out for in order to, do well by doing good. It's something that I think everyone brought up today, is that we are all trying to do good as well as grow. And if we want to grow safely, securely, and keep consumers safe and secure, we have to take some responsibility in this. So thank you so much for coming, and be sure to hop on to our next session in 5 minutes, the power of payments, where we will be learning about how innovative payment strategies can open up opportunities for that business growth. So we'll see you all soon. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.